What if the school that destroyed your future was now begging you to save its own? What would you do if the very institution that destroyed your childhood begged you to save it 15 years ago? Two brilliant black boys were branded as cheaters and expelled from Westbrook Academy by a system built to exclude them. Their only crime: being exceptional in a school that couldn't tolerate brilliance from the wrong zip code. Now, they're back, but not as students. Malik and Micah Carter walk through the halls of the same school that once shattered their future, this time in tailored suits, carrying the fate of the academy in their hands, no longer victims. They become founders of the Carter Foundation, a multi-million-dollar educational nonprofit with the power to decide whether Westbrook lives or dies. The principal smiles. The board leans forward. And a teacher from the past, Ellen Prescott, goes pale as the twins utter one chilling sentence: "We have conditions." What unfolds next isn't just a reunion, it's a reckoning. Behind Westbrook's ivy-covered walls lies a buried truth of corruption, systemic racism, and financial fraud. The expulsion wasn't just about race. It was about silencing two boys who outshined the children of wealthy donors while being quietly used to secure federal grant money. But the Carters didn't come for revenge. They came to expose the lie, to rewrite the institution from the inside out, and to ask the woman who once betrayed them to now lead the reform. What they demand will shake the very foundations of Westbrook Public Resignations, a scholarship program for underrepresented students, and complete transparency. And just when you think the truth has been fully unearthed, a whistleblower steps in with documents that reveal an even deeper conspiracy, one that could lead to the collapse of the school entirely. In the face of legacy, power, and fear, the Carter twins offer something rare: not destruction, but transformation. What does justice look like after 15 years of silence? It looks like walking back into the fire, holding your head high, and daring the world to remember what it tried to erase. This is not just a story of return, it's a story of reclaiming truth, rewriting history, and building a legacy that was once denied. So lean in, because what happens next will leave you breathless. The air in the front office of Westbrook Academy was still, heavy with the scent of old wood polish and something else: anticipation. 15 years had passed since the Carter twins had last walked through these halls, but the moment they stepped through the doors, time seemed to fold in on itself. Dressed in tailored charcoal suits that whispered power with every step, Malik and Micah Carter didn't just enter, they arrived. The receptionist, a young woman too new to know their story, glanced up and blinked, as if sensing a shift in the air but not knowing why. But Principal Janet Hollowell knew. She rose from behind her desk the second she saw them, her polished exterior cracking ever so slightly as recognition dawned. It wasn't just the suits or the success that startled her, it was the quiet authority in their eyes, the calm confidence of men who knew they had outgrown the institution that once cast them out. Malik walked a step ahead, his posture deliberate, his gaze sweeping the room with sharp calculation. Micah followed, his demeanor softer, but no less commanding. Together, they exuded the kind of quiet force that made people sit up straighter without realizing it. "Gentlemen," Principal Hollowell said, attempting composure as she extended her hand. "Thank you for coming." Malik took it briefly, his grip firm but not warm. "Thank you for receiving us," he replied coolly. Micah's eyes flicked toward the photos lining the wall, images of past headmasters, championship teams, plaques of donors, none of which bore their name, despite the role they once played in this school's narrative. A silence settled, weighted with unspoken history. Hollowell gestured toward the conference room, but Malik shook his head. "We'd like to speak in your office," he said, his tone calm but resolute. The principal hesitated, then nodded, leading them down the familiar hallway, As they passed a janitor buffing the floor, the man paused, his eyes lingering. Maybe he remembered them, maybe not. But the shift was undeniable. Westbrook had once expelled them in disgrace. Today, it stood on the brink of begging them for salvation. From the far end of the hallway, Ellen Prescott froze mid-step, the stack of papers in her arms suddenly weightless. Forgotten. She hadn't seen their faces in 15 years, but the moment her eyes landed on the two men speaking with Principal Hollowell in the office, time collapsed like a snapped thread. Her breath caught. The taller one, Malik, still held that quiet fire in his eyes, the same intensity she remembered from the little boy who had always sat at the edge of his seat, answering questions before she finished asking them. And Micah, God. Micah, his smile was gone now, but she remembered it clearly, the way he used to scribble stories in his composition notebook during recess. Ellen staggered back a step, heart thudding, guilt surging like a tidal wave she had tried to keep buried under years of silence and rationalization. She had told herself they would be fine, that it was out of her hands, that it wasn't her place to challenge what the school board had already decided, but none of those excuses could shield her now. She watched as the twins were ushered down the hallway, not as lost children, but as powerful men with a purpose. They passed by the same trophy cases that had once excluded their achievements, the same sterile walls that had witnessed their humiliation. Ellen's vision blurred as the memory returned in full color the day their grandmother stood alone in the principal's office, pleading for fairness while Ellen remained silent, watching from the corner, too afraid to speak up. She had told herself she was protecting her job, but in doing so, she had helped destroy their futures. Now, they were back, and the weight of her inaction crashed over her with unbearable force. She slipped quietly into a side hallway, clutching the papers to her chest as if they might hold back the past. But it was too late. The past had returned in polished shoes and fitted suits, and it had looked her dead in the eye. Principal Janet Hollowell stood behind her desk, hands folded tightly to hide the tremble in her fingers as she turned to address the small group of senior faculty now gathered in her office. Their eyes were curious, some skeptical, none aware of the storm about to roll through the brittle halls of Westbrook Academy. With a tight smile, she gestured toward the two men standing beside her, impeccable in tailored suits, their presence commanding without a single word spoken. "Everyone," she began, her voice steady despite the tension coiled beneath it. "Please allow me to introduce Mr. Malik Carter and Mr. Micah Carter, representatives of the Carter Foundation." A hush fell over the room as heads turned. Some faces lit up in recognition, others narrowed with confusion, but the surname hit like a silent bomb. Carter. The name etched into dusty memory and hidden files. Hollowell continued quickly, her tone brisk, businesslike, masking the undercurrent of unease. The Carter Foundation is currently one of the most prominent emerging educational nonprofits in the region. Their initiatives span across 12 states, focusing on equitable access to advanced education and institutional reform. She paused, letting the words settle. They are here today because our school, Westbrook, is facing a financial crisis that can no longer be ignored. Murmurs stirred as she opened a folder on her desk, revealing spreadsheets and financial forecasts in grim red ink. "We have 3 months, perhaps less. Enrollment is down. Our alumni donations have dried up. The district subsidy can't stretch far enough to keep our doors open through the next semester." She looked up, her eyes scanning the room before returning to the Carter twins, her expression unreadable. The Carter Foundation is considering a substantial donation, one that could not only stabilize our operating budget, but also provide the foundation for a complete institutional renewal. Several faculty members shifted uncomfortably. The realization was dawning that these men, once expelled from the school under humiliating and deeply unjust circumstances, now had the power to either resurrect or dismantle the very place that had cast them aside. But the twins remained silent, observing, evaluating. They had not come to make a spectacle. They had come to see if Westbrook was worth saving. Malik Carter stepped forward with the quiet confidence of a man who had waited years for this moment, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. He scanned the room slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to ensure that every person present leaned in. His voice, when it came, was calm, but weighted with a power that made the temperature in the office seem to drop. "Before we talk numbers," he said evenly, "before we speak of budgets and rescue plans and legacy preservation, I need to be clear about something." His eyes locked on Principal Hollowell's, then moved to the semicircle of faculty who now stood as still as statues. "My brother and I didn't return to Westbrook just to write a check." He paused, letting the words land. "We came to address something that was never confronted. A truth that was buried under bureaucracy and silence. A decision that changed the trajectory of our lives, and not for the better." Micah's jaw tightened beside him, his silence a statement in itself. Malik continued, his gaze sharp but not accusatory. 15 years ago, we were expelled from this institution for something we didn't do. We were labeled, discarded, and erased from the school's narrative. And the worst part, he took a step forward. No one ever looked back. No one ever asked whether what happened was just, whether it was right. Ellen Prescott flinched in the corner, shrinking slightly behind the others, but Malik didn't name names. Not yet. "We're not here for revenge," he added, his tone firm but measured. "But we are here for accountability, for transparency, for the truth that was stolen not just from us, but from this school's integrity." "You want the Carter Foundation's support," he let the silence speak for a moment. "Then understand this. The past is part of the price." The tension in the room was palpable now, thick with the weight of unspoken history. The air didn't move. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz more loudly. Malik folded his hands in front of him, calm, composed, immovable. "You say Westbrook wants a future. We say start by facing its past." 15 years earlier, the halls of Westbrook Academy still gleamed with fresh coats of ivory paint and the scent of polished mahogany that clung to the old staircases like history itself. Back then, the Carter twins were just 8 years old, Malik and Micah, wide-eyed, quiet, and observant, their small frames nearly swallowed up by the crisp navy uniforms their grandmother had saved for months to buy. They had arrived mid-semester, 2 transfer students from a crumbling public school on the other side of the city. While most of the students at Westbrook had last names that echoed through real estate holdings and law firm plaques, the Carters came with nothing but their minds and a fierce, unspoken bond that only twins and survivors could share. Ellen Prescott had noticed them immediately. She'd been teaching second grade for almost a decade at that point, and in her experience, most new students kept their heads down, too overwhelmed to shine right away. But these two were different. From the first week, Malik had raised his hand with gentle confidence, solving math problems 2 grades ahead with ease, while Micah devoured books so quickly she'd begun bringing him extra novels from her own shelf at home. They never interrupted, never bragged, never demanded attention, and yet, somehow, the room revolved around their quiet excellence. Ellen remembered the way Malik's eyes lit up when she taught them fractions using baking measurements, or how Micah's short story about a lost starship made her tear up one rainy afternoon when she read it during recess duty. She told herself then, with something like pride swelling in her chest, "These boys are going to change the world someday, and she believed it. She defended them in the teacher's lounge when other staff muttered about diversity quotas and fitting in. She brought them extra snacks from her lunch when they forgot theirs, and once even slipped a note into their backpack that read, "Never dim your brilliance to fit someone else's shadow." For a while, Westbrook felt like a rare haven for them and for her, until it wasn't. Until the spring came, and with it, a sudden shift in tone, questions whispered in faculty meetings, suspicious glances in the hallway. Then one day, Ellen was called into a meeting with a newly appointed administrator, Gregory Hallowell, who placed a test paper on the table in front of her and said with thinly veiled certainty, "This is how gifted children cheat." She remembered the panic rising in her throat as she scanned the page, a math worksheet with Malik's name on it, but answers written in a strangely uneven hand, one that didn't match his neat, deliberate style. It didn't make sense. But her protests were dismissed. "We're protecting the school's standards," they told her. "If we let this slide, we compromise everything." She hadn't believed it then. Not truly. But Ellen was young, still paying off her own student loans. And her father, who sat on the school's donor board, had warned her about being too attached to her students. She remembered the weight in her stomach when she walked into class the next morning, seeing the twins smile at her, trusting her, unaware of what was coming. She'd smiled back, tight-lipped, and said nothing. Days later, they were gone. No ceremony, no goodbyes, just 2 empty chairs and a silence that echoed through the classroom louder than any bell. Ellen had buried it, convinced herself she'd had no choice. But the truth was, she'd failed them not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much and lacked the courage to act. And now, 15 years later, standing in the same building with those same boys now, men watching her with the weight of history in their eyes, she realized that the past wasn't done with her. Not yet. Ellen Prescott had once believed, with the kind of conviction that shapes entire careers, that she was a protector of children, a defender of the bright, the curious, the overlooked. She entered the profession with more than lesson plans and polished credentials. She came armed with a mission, raised by a mother who'd marched for desegregation and a father who'd built his life in academia. Ellen had grown up on stories of brave teachers who defied the system to stand beside their students. She had wanted to be that kind of teacher, the kind who saw children not for where they came from, but for who they could become. And for a while, for years, she took pride in staying late to help struggling students, in attending their plays and science fairs when their parents couldn't make it, in pushing back when colleagues dismissed those kids with knowing glances and tired cynicism. She wore her empathy like armor. But all the good intentions in the world hadn't saved Malik and Micah Carter. They were the kind of students who lit up her classroom, eager, respectful, astonishingly gifted. Ellen had loved them from the start, not in a maternal or sentimental way, but in the way a gardener treasures saplings that grow faster and stronger than anything planted before. She'd even said so aloud once, too proudly, too publicly. That moment would come back to haunt her. When the accusation surfaced that the boys had cheated on a standardized test, she had laughed at first, thinking it some clerical mistake. Micah. The very idea was absurd, but the tone in the faculty meetings changed, whispers spreading like mold through the walls of Westbrook. There were murmurs about quotas, about pressure from the board, about how too much excellence from the wrong place could upset the balance. Ellen remembered how Principal Gregory Hallowell had summoned her to his office, the beige walls lined with plaques honoring decades of Westbrook tradition. He hadn't yelled. He didn't need to. Instead, he placed a photocopied worksheet on the desk and asked, "Can you be absolutely certain Malik wrote this?" And in that moment, shamefully, fatally, her certainty faltered. It wasn't that she believed he had cheated. It was that she doubted her ability to protect him. She remembered how her pulse pounded in her ears as Hollowell slid a second folder across the desk, one that held her contract renewal and a veiled suggestion that her loyalty to certain students might be perceived as unprofessional bias. Ellen had always thought herself strong, but strength is easy in a vacuum. That day, under pressure she couldn't admit even to herself, she folded. She didn't defend them. She didn't protest when their expulsion was announced in coded language about academic integrity. She signed the paperwork. She kept her job. And then she spent the next 15 years trying to pretend it had never happened. But the memory never really left. It lurked beneath every student conference, every diversity committee meeting. Every time she looked at a child and thought, what if I fail them too? She had convinced herself she had no power, that she had been a victim of circumstance. But deep down she knew the truth. She had betrayed them, not by action, but by silence, by doing nothing, by allowing 2 children to be branded and discarded by an institution that claimed to uplift brilliance, so long as that brilliance came in a familiar package. That betrayal festered inside her like rot in the roots of a tree, poisoning every attempt at redemption she tried to grow. Now, as she stood across from the Carter twins once more, no longer boys, but men of quiet power and purposeful presence, she felt the full weight of that failure pressing against her ribcage. Her belief in herself as a protector had died the moment she looked away, and now they had returned, not with vengeance, but with a mirror, one that reflected back the truth of who she had been when it mattered most. Malik Carter leaned forward, the tailored lines of his navy suit crisp, but his voice calm, deliberate, carrying the gravity of someone who was not just delivering an offer, but setting the terms of reckoning. The conference room fell silent as he placed a sleek leather folder on the polished oak table. "Before we discuss numbers," he said, his gaze sweeping over Principal Janet Hollowell, Ellen Prescott, and the visibly anxious board members, "we need to be clear about our conditions because this isn't just about money. This is about legacy, about justice." He opened the folder slowly, the deliberate motion amplifying the tension already coiled tight in the room. "Condition 1, he began, "is full transparency. 15 years ago, my brother and I were expelled from this institution under a lie. That lie followed us from school to school, tarnished our records, and nearly derailed our futures. And while we rebuilt ourselves through grit, community, and grace, the record at Westbrook remained unchanged, a neat, quiet erasure of 2 boys who never stopped believing in the power of education. We want that record corrected, publicly. The truth must be stated clearly by this institution that we did not cheat, that the expulsion was wrongful, and that it reflected systemic bias, both individual and institutional. This statement must come from the school's leadership, endorsed by the board, and published with the same visibility as the original disciplinary action." He let the words sink in. Across the table, Ellen's hands trembled just slightly in her lap, though she tried to hide it. "Condition 2, Malik continued, "is structural. We are proposing the establishment of the Carter Scholars Initiative, a long-term, fully funded scholarship program for underrepresented and underserved students. This means children of color, students raised by single parents or grandparents, kids from low-income neighborhoods, the very students who are too often overlooked in elite spaces like Westbrook. This initiative will not just pay tuition. It will provide mentorship, counseling, academic support, and guaranteed placement opportunities post-graduation. These students won't just be admitted, they will be equipped to thrive, and they will never have to question if they belong." Principal Hollowell nodded slowly, still too stunned to speak. Malik paused for a moment, then met Ellen's eyes directly. "Which brings me to condition 3. We want Miss Ellen Prescott to oversee this program. Ellen's breath caught, audible in the silence that followed. You knew us, Malik said, voice softer now, but still unwavering. You believed in us, until you didn't. And that betrayal hurt. But we also believe in accountability, and in the possibility of redemption, if it's earned. You spent the last 15 years living with what you did, or failed to do. Here is your chance to make it right, not in theory, not behind a desk, but in action. If you agree to lead this program, to serve as a mentor to the very kinds of students you once abandoned under pressure, then we will consider it a gesture of good faith. You will not be alone. The Carter Foundation will provide the training, the staff, the infrastructure, but we want someone who understands both the promise and the danger of this place to be its conscience. Ellen sat frozen, emotion storming behind her eyes, grief, guilt, disbelief, and something harder to define hope. We're not here to humiliate anyone, Malik added, but we won't prop up an institution that refuses to face its past. These are not demands, they're opportunities for healing, for transformation, for Westbrook to become the school it always claimed to be. His final words lingered in the room like a judgment and an invitation all at once, and no one, not even the most skeptical board member, could deny that something irreversible had just shifted. Ellen Prescott sat motionless in her chair, as if her very breath had been stolen by Malik Carter's final words. Her name, spoken not in anger but in conviction, still echoed in her mind. She blinked, once, twice, trying to process the weight of what had just been placed at her feet. Of all the possibilities she had imagined for this meeting, being entrusted with a role so vital, so symbolic, was not one of them. She had braced herself for confrontation, for condemnation, for the quiet shame of being sidelined and rightfully forgotten. But this was something else entirely. The idea that after all these years, after the silence, the failure, the complicity, she would be asked to lead the very program designed to repair the injustice she had once allowed, felt like both a cruel irony and an improbable grace. Her hands trembled faintly on her lap, fingers clasped together as if in silent prayer or penance. I don't understand, she finally whispered, her voice breaking around the edges. You want me after everything across the table. Malik met her gaze without hesitation, his eyes sharp but not unkind. Yes, he said simply. You. Ellen's chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. But Malik, I failed you. Both of you. I didn't stand up when I should have. I knew something was wrong. I felt it in my gut. And I still let them take you. I was a coward. Malik nodded slowly. You were, he said, his honesty cutting through the room with surgical precision. But that's exactly why it has to be you. Ellen stared at him, stunned. He leaned forward slightly, his tone unwavering. Because you know what it feels like to betray your values. You know the weight of regret, of silence, of complicity. We don't need someone perfect to lead this initiative. We need someone who understands the cost of failure, so they never let it happen again. The room was utterly still, the board members watching with a mix of discomfort and awe. Ellen swallowed hard, emotion burning hot behind her eyes. But won't my involvement cast doubt? Won't people question my role? Malik gave a quiet, almost weary smile. Some will, he admitted. But that's part of the work. You don't get to erase what happened. None of us do. But you get to face it. Every day. And in doing so, maybe help these students feel seen in a way we never were. Ellen felt her throat tighten, the full scope of his words landing with crushing clarity. This wasn't a reward. It was a reckoning. A second chance not to redeem her past, but to repurpose it for something larger than her own guilt. We're not giving you this position because we forgot what you did. Malik continued, his voice deepening. We're offering it because we remember, because your failure had consequences, and now, so must your growth. If we let this place heal, it has to be with people willing to carry the full weight of what went wrong. Ellen nodded slowly, tears threatening but held back by the sheer force of purpose beginning to flicker in her chest. This wasn't absolution. It was accountability in motion. And strangely, it felt like the most honest thing anyone had ever asked of her. For the first time in years, she felt her spine straighten, her breath steady. Then I'll do it, she said quietly, but firmly. Whatever it takes. Malik's expression didn't soften with sentiment, but with something deeper respect. Good, he said. Because the students who walk through these doors tomorrow will need a champion who knows exactly what's at stake. The heavy door to the conference room creaked open with a slow, deliberate groan that pulled every eye in the room toward it. For a moment, there was only the echo of silence, the kind of pause that lives between breaths, between heartbeats. And then she stepped in. Alma Carter, a woman of quiet storms and unflinching resolve. Her silver-streaked hair was pinned neatly into a twist, and her clothes, while modest, carried the dignity of a woman who'd spent her life standing up straight, even when the world tried to bend her. Her presence changed the atmosphere instantly. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. The room made space for her the way water yields to a stone, not out of fear, but respect. Ellen Prescott stood instinctively, as if pulled by some magnetic force of memory and remorse. Her lips parted in recognition. But she didn't speak. She couldn't. Not yet. Malik and Micah both turned to her in sync, not startled, but expectant. They knew she would come. They had asked her to stay back, to let them handle it. But Alma Carter had not crossed decades of pain and silence to stay seated while history was rewritten. Her eyes scanned the room. Janet Hollowell, the board members, the superintendent in his crisp suit, the familiar walls of an institution that had once tossed her grandsons aside as if they were expendable. She stepped further in, the click of her low heels deliberate on the hardwood floor, and then, her voice low, rich, unwavering, cut through the tension like a blade of truth. This time, she said slowly, the truth will not be buried. Her words landed like a bell tolling in a cathedral final, reverent, impossible to ignore. The board chair shifted uncomfortably. Principal Hollowell blinked, visibly unsettled by the clarity in Alma's tone, but Alma wasn't finished. She moved closer to the center of the room, each step a statement in itself. 15 years ago, she continued, this school didn't just expel 2 boys. It erased them. It stripped their names from the record books, buried their achievements, and made them ghosts in a place where they once shined brighter than any child had the right to. Her voice didn't rise, but it gathered force like a river during flood season. I remember the day it happened. I stood right in this building, holding test scores, artwork, teacher notes, proof of their brilliance. And I begged someone to listen. But no one did. Not because they couldn't hear me, but because they didn't want to. Because what they would have had to admit terrified them more than the injustice they were committing. She turned her gaze directly on Ellen now, and for a moment, the 2 women stared at each other across a chasm of years and silence. But there was no hatred in Alma's eyes, only the deep, aching weariness of someone who had carried truth like a cross on her back for too long. "You saw them," Alma said to Ellen, voice soft but sharp. "You knew. And when they needed someone to speak, you went quiet." Ellen opened her mouth, shame blooming across her face, but Alma raised a hand gently. "I'm not here to punish you," she said. "I've done enough punishing in my heart to last a lifetime. But if we are to heal, truly heal, then we start by telling the truth out loud. In full view, no redactions, no polite omissions." She turned back to the board, her posture straight, her chin lifted. "These boys, my grandsons, did not break this school. This school broke them. And now they've come back not with lawsuits or protests or fury, though all of that would be justified. They came with something far more dangerous: hope, vision, the willingness to rebuild something better. And if that scares you, it should. Because it means the old way of doing things is finally being dismantled." Micah's eyes shimmered with emotion as he looked at her, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. This was her moment, her reckoning. "For too long," Alma said, "institutions like this one have written history with only half the ink. They write the wins, the scholarships, the donors, but they leave out the failures the students crushed under the pressure to fit a mold they were never meant to occupy. My grandsons were punished not because they did anything wrong, but because they did everything right in a system that was never designed to hold them." Her eyes narrowed now, not with anger, but with truth that had become steel. "Well, the system is changing. Today, in this room." She reached into her bag and pulled out a weathered folder, edges curled, paper faded with time. "This," she said, placing it on the table, "is the record you never kept. The essays Micah wrote that won regional awards. The math contests Malik scored perfect marks on. The letters from teachers at other schools, stunned by their talent. This is what you erased. But I didn't. I kept it. Every scrap. Every proof. Because I knew this day would come." The room was utterly silent. Even the AC vents seemed to hush themselves in reverence. Alma's voice, though quieter now, held a finality that left no room for argument. "You want forgiveness? You want healing? Start here. Start by acknowledging what you took. And give it back, not just with words, but with action. Because if you don't, then every speech, every donation, every rebrand will just be a more polite version of the same lie." She stepped back and folded her hands in front of her, regal and composed, her presence both anchor and challenge. Malik turned toward the board, his voice steady but softer now, layered with something that sounded like gratitude. "Our grandmother taught us to carry truth even when it was heavy," he said, "and to speak it even when our voices shook. So now we ask the same of you." Alma didn't need to speak again. She had done what she came to do. The truth had finally been spoken, not in whispers, not in hallways, but in the center of power, and with the clarity of someone who had waited a lifetime to be heard. And for the first time in 15 years, no one in that room dared to look away. It had been a Tuesday morning, spring sunlight streaming through the blinds in slanted gold lines when Ellen Prescott was called into Gregory Holloway's office. She hadn't expected anything unusual. Holloway had only recently been promoted to vice principal, and while he carried himself with an air of polished civility, something about his constant need to assert control over the staff made Ellen uneasy. Still, she had gone. She had sat across from him at the long glass table, her gradebook balanced in her lap, and waited for him to speak. What he said would change the course of 2 young lives forever. "We have a situation," Gregory had begun, his tone light, almost performative, as if he were hosting a game show instead of initiating a professional ambush. He slid a file toward her, thick, pristine, too prepared. Inside were test results, copies of Mullick Carter's math exams, and a printed email from an anonymous staff member raising concerns about academic integrity. Ellen had furrowed her brows immediately. "This can't be right," she'd said, scanning the pages. "Malik's one of the most gifted students I've ever taught. He doesn't need to cheat. His work is consistent, advanced, and gifted." Gregory had interrupted with a cold smile. "Yes, we've heard that word quite a bit lately. But sometimes children who are pushed too hard or too fast find ways to stay ahead. You of all people should know that." His tone was polite, but the implication hung heavy in the air like smoke. Ellen had felt her stomach tighten. "Who made this accusation?" she asked. "Why wasn't I consulted before it escalated?" Gregory's eyes didn't blink. "Because this isn't about you, Ellen. It's about what's best for Westbrook's reputation. The board is watching. Our donors are watching. And to be honest, they're a little uneasy with how much attention these boys are getting. It's raising questions." That was the first time she had felt it, the shift from concern to calculation. He leaned forward then, voice lowering. "Look, I'm not saying the Carters are bad kids. But think about optics. 2 scholarship students outperforming legacy admissions. High-ranking donors' children being overshadowed. It's creating tension. And tension leads to scrutiny. We can't afford that right now." Ellen's voice had trembled slightly. "Are you asking me to support a false accusation?" Gregory's expression hardened. "I'm asking you to cooperate for the good of the institution. We're offering them a chance to quietly withdraw. If they refuse, we'll pursue expulsion. But it'll be clean. No media, no mess. Just resolved." Then he'd slid another folder toward her, this one thinner and distinctly personal. Inside was a photo grainy, but recognizable. Ellen, years earlier, standing at a protest rally holding a Justice for All student sign, flanked by 2 local activists whose names had once made the local news. "You recognize this?" Gregory had asked casually. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Ellen. But the board might wonder if your biases are influencing your teaching. They might question your judgment, especially if you're seen as defending certain narratives." Ellen had gone cold. That photo had never been published. It was supposed to be private, forgotten. Her father himself, a member of the Westbrook Alumni Association, had warned her about getting involved in such movements. "You'll lose your footing before you gain any ground," he'd told her. She looked up at Gregory, who said nothing more, letting the silence do the rest. And in that moment, Ellen Prescott made a choice not out of belief, not out of certainty, but out of fear. Fear of losing her job, fear of disappointing her family, fear of being labeled. She signed the statement. She kept silent during the hearing. And when the Carters disappeared from her classroom, she didn't protest. She buried the truth in the name of survival, and it haunted her every day since. The moment Ellen Prescott saw the photograph, she felt something inside her splinter, something fundamental and steady that had held her together all these years. It was just a single image, faded and grainy, printed on cheap copy paper and slipped into a thin manila folder. But its weight was immeasurable. There she was, unmistakably younger, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, a handmade cardboard sign raised high above her head, Justice for All Students. She was standing on the steps of a courthouse, shoulder to shoulder with 2 known civil rights activists, men who had, at various points, been labeled radicals by local press. At the time, Ellen hadn't cared. She was fresh out of graduate school, still lit by the fire of ideas and justice, still naive enough to think the system could be changed simply by standing tall in front of it. But that version of her, the idealist, had been buried long ago, under layers of compromise and caution. Gregory Holloway tapped the folder with his finger, a small, practiced smile curling at the edges of his lips. "You recognize this?" "Don't you?" he asked, casually, like he was pointing out a stain on her shirt. "This is you, Ellen. And these men, Malcolm Timms and Reggie Bryant. You remember them too, I'm sure." Ellen's throat went dry. She didn't respond. Didn't have to. The photo said everything. She could see her name and face in a future headline, "Westbrook educator tied to anti-institution activists." Her father's voice echoed in her head like a warning bell. "Stay out of trouble. Ellen. Don't let your politics cost you your place." And here it was, that cost, being handed to her in black and white. "This isn't a threat," Gregory said smoothly, leaning back in his chair, the very picture of relaxed authority. "It's just context. The board is deeply invested in Westbrook's image. Families, donors, media, they all want assurance that our staff reflects the school's values. Now, I'm not saying you've done anything wrong, but if word got out that you've been defending 2 scholarship students accused of cheating students who, I should mention, have already caused some unrest among more established families, and if this photo came out at the same time, well, let's just say it would raise some uncomfortable questions." Ellen felt her hands tightening into fists in her lap, her nails digging into her palm. "You're using this to silence me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Gregory shrugged. "I'm giving you an opportunity to protect yourself and the institution you serve. Westbrook has survived this long because people understand when to put the greater good ahead of personal conviction. I know you care about those boys, but sometimes caring means letting go." The logic was as poisonous as it was persuasive. Ellen had devoted her entire adult life to Westbrook. Her classroom was her sanctuary, her reputation, her shield. A public scandal, even a suggestion of insubordination, could unravel everything. Her contract renewal, her future advancement, her standing with her father and his peers. And so she sat there, staring at the photo, feeling her idealism drain from her like color from a dying photograph. "What would you like me to do?" she asked finally, the words tasting like ash. Gregory smiled, folding the folder neatly and placing it back on the table. "Nothing. Just support the process. Let it unfold without interference. Don't make noise. Don't take sides. Let the system run its course." And she did. For weeks, she said nothing. When questioned, she offered vague platitudes. When the expulsion was announced, she kept her eyes low. And when Malik and Micah Carter walked out of Westbrook Academy for the last time, Ellen Prescott closed her classroom door, sat behind her desk, and cried quietly, bitterly knowing that she had let fear speak louder than truth, and knowing, deep down, that Gregory Holloway never needed the photo at all. She had already given him everything he wanted the moment she chose silence over justice. The room was heavy with tension when Ellen Prescott rose slowly from her seat, her hands trembling slightly as she reached into the leather bag she had brought with her. No one spoke. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. For a long moment, it looked as though she might change her mind, might retreat into silence one final time. But then, with quiet resolve, she pulled out a folded piece of aged stationery and held it in her palm like a relic. Her voice, though hushed, carried the clarity of someone finally ready to face the truth. "There's something I need to show you," she said, her gaze locked on Principal Hollowell, then drifting toward the Carter twins. Something I should have shared a long time ago. She unfolded the paper with deliberate care, the creases etched deep from years of hiding. The ink was faded but legible, and the signature at the bottom, Gregory Holloway, was unmistakable. "This," Ellen said, lifting the letter for all to see, "is a handwritten note I received from then Vice Principal Holloway, dated 2 days before Malik and Micah were expelled." A ripple of tension spread through the boardroom. She began to read aloud, her voice faltering only slightly. "Ellen, I trust you will handle the situation with the Carter boys discreetly. There are expectations coming down from the board, and we both know the consequences of drawing unwanted attention. Think carefully about your professional standing and what's at stake for your family before taking a stance that could jeopardize everything you've worked for." Ellen paused, letting the words settle like dust over a long sealed room. He never needed to say the word coerce. He didn't have to. The message was clear. Keep quiet, or risk everything. She looked down at the paper, her fingers tightening around its edges. "I kept this letter not to protect myself, but because part of me always knew I'd have to face this day. And maybe, in some twisted way, I hoped this proof would one day help make things right." She placed the letter gently on the table between them all. No longer a secret, no longer a weight carried in silence. This is my confession, and my beginning. Micah Carter sat still for a moment, watching Ellen's letter settle on the table like the final note of a long, unfinished song. Then, without speaking, he reached into the sleek black folder in front of him, his movements precise, almost surgical. He withdrew a thin stack of papers bound by a single metal clip and laid it carefully beside Ellen's document. The title at the top of the first page was crisp and unmistakable: Independent Forensic Handwriting Analysis, Carter Case File. His voice, when he finally spoke, was measured and calm, but beneath it ran a quiet thunder of restrained emotion. 2 months ago, my brother and I submitted copies of the exam that got us expelled to a certified forensic handwriting analyst. We wanted answers, not assumptions, not rumors, just facts. He flipped the cover page to reveal 2 side-by-side samples, one from the test allegedly completed by Malik, and the other from a collection of verified classwork written by him during that school year. The handwriting on the exam was not Malik's. Not even close. Micah continued, his tone sharpening as he turned the next page to show a magnified comparison of letter formations, stroke angles, and pressure consistency. According to the analysis, the test paper showed signs of deliberate mimicry. Someone tried to copy his handwriting but got it wrong. Inconsistent slants, wrong loop heights, hesitation marks in places where a confident hand wouldn't pause. This wasn't just a forged test. It was a setup. The room remained dead silent, the implications crashing down like glass shattering in slow motion. Micah looked around the table, meeting the eyes of every board member, every administrator, every person who had once accepted the school's version of the truth without question. This analysis was conducted by an expert who has testified in federal court, he added, sliding a copy of the credentials forward. This isn't speculation. It's forensic fact. He turned finally to Principal Hollowell, his voice no longer quiet. 15 years ago, someone inside this school fabricated evidence to destroy our future. And now, we have proof. His final words rang through the room like a verdict. Not shouted, just true. Janet Hollowell's voice broke the heavy silence like a crack through glass, sharp, uncertain, and laced with something between disbelief and dread. Why, she asked, her eyes darting between the letter Ellen had produced and the forensic report Micah had laid bare before them. Why would anyone go that far to forge a test, to destroy 2 children's lives? The question hung in the air, not as a demand, but as an exhale of collective guilt that no one in the room could fully claim or fully deny. Micah turned his gaze toward her. But it was Malik who responded, his voice low and unwavering. Because we were never supposed to succeed here. He said it not as a theory, but as a fact. Because when 2 scholarship kids, 2 black boys from the East Side, start outperforming the sons and daughters of board members and legacy donors, it doesn't go unnoticed. It goes unwanted. The words stung. Because they were not dramatic, they were merely honest. We were threatening the balance, Malik continued. Not by misbehaving, not by causing trouble, but by being better. Too good, too fast, and too visible. He looked down at the table, then back up at Janet, his voice quieter now, but more pointed. We weren't the story Westbrook wanted to tell. Ellen closed her eyes as if to block out the truth she already knew, while several board members shifted in their seats, uncomfortable under the weight of a truth that had gone unspoken for too long. Micah added, "Someone up top decided it would be easier to erase us than to explain us. And instead of challenging that, too many people looked away, or worse, helped make it happen." Janet's face tightened. She wasn't just hearing this as a principal, she was hearing it as a woman who had inherited a system built to polish certain stories and bury others. "But children," she murmured. "You were children." Malik nodded. "And children are the easiest to silence when the people in power convince themselves it's for the greater good." There was no outrage in his tone, just a weary clarity. This wasn't just about one test or one teacher's silence. It was a culture. A decision made in backrooms and board meetings to protect the image of the institution at any cost, even if that cost was us. Just as the room settled into a stunned, uneasy silence, the door creaked open once more. Heads turned, unsure whether to brace for another accusation or explanation. But the figure who entered did not stride in with authority or polished presence. He moved slowly, almost cautiously, with a worn leather briefcase clutched tightly in his left hand and a nervous weight behind his eyes. Franklin Hayes, former treasurer of Westbrook Academy, had returned after more than a decade of absence. His once dark hair was now streaked with gray, and the lines around his mouth had deepened, not from age alone, but from carrying secrets too long. He paused at the threshold, scanning the room until his eyes met Malik's, then Ellen's, then finally, Janet Hollowell's. Clearing his throat, he spoke in a voice that wavered at first but gained firmness with each syllable. "I believe it's time you all saw the full picture," he said, lifting the briefcase and placing it gently on the long oak table. Because what happened to the Carter boys wasn't just about prejudice or pressure, it was also about money. A lot of it. He unclasped the brass locks and pulled out a set of thick, carefully preserved folders. "During my final year here," he continued, "Westbrook received a significant federal grant, over $400,000, meant for inclusive curriculum development, student retention programs, and scholarships for underrepresented youth." His tone darkened. It was a chance to finally live up to the school's mission statement. A bitter chuckle escaped him. Instead, that money was quietly siphoned off. A portion rerouted to campus beautification, another disguised as bonuses, and the rest, it vanished into administrative overhead, approved by board signatures I was pressured not to question. He opened the folder, revealing spreadsheets, emails, and correspondence with grant officials. But what no one expected, he said, looking directly at Janet now, was that Malik and Micah Carter, 2 of the very students that funding was intended to support, would rise so quickly, so visibly, that their presence would threaten to expose the misuse. He tapped a single highlighted document. Expelling them wasn't just about control. It was about covering tracks, about silencing the human evidence of a crime committed in boardrooms and budgets. Franklin took a deep breath, then added, "I kept these files because I knew the day would come when the truth demanded to be heard. Today is that day." The room was silent but no longer stunned. It was bracing for the reckoning it could no longer avoid. Franklin Hayes drew a deep breath, his fingers brushing over the top page of the folder as though the paper itself carried the weight of a confession long buried. His voice grew steadier now, fueled not by confidence but by the clarity of finally speaking the truth. "The federal grant in question," he began, "was part of a national initiative designed to close achievement gaps and promote equity in elite academic institutions. Westbrook was awarded those funds not because of its past performance, but because of its promise, its commitment to creating opportunities for students who came from historically marginalized communities." He paused, eyes shifting to Malik and Micah, students like the Carter twins. He flipped the page to reveal the original grant application, complete with highlighted language, targeted support for underrepresented, low-income, and minority students who demonstrate exceptional academic potential. His voice sharpened. It wasn't a generic investment in school improvement. It was explicit. Every dollar came with a purpose, and that purpose had names. He looked directly at Janet Hollowell. Malik and Micah were not incidental. They were central. Their enrollment was cited in our grant justification. Their academic progress was reported in our compliance documentation. They were, in every way, the living embodiment of the very mission that secured this funding. The room grew still as the gravity of his words settled like dust over forgotten truth. Franklin continued, "I remember the excitement when the approval came through. There were meetings, speeches, even a press release drafted that never went out. But somewhere between the promise and the implementation, greed stepped in. Those funds meant to provide tutoring, mentorship programs, access to STEM enrichment. Even emotional wellness resources were redirected. The programs were quietly scrapped or underfunded. The twins were left without the support the government had paid to ensure." His voice dropped, tight with remorse. And when Malik and Micah continued to thrive despite that, when they became too visible, too excellent, it was no longer just about neglect. It became a threat. Because their success risked drawing attention to the fact that the money meant to support them had already been spent elsewhere. He opened another folder: receipts, internal memos, canceled check stubs. What happened to them wasn't just educational injustice. It was financial fraud disguised as discipline. And I kept quiet. I rationalized. I told myself I was protecting the school's reputation. But all I really did was help bury 2 children to protect a lie. And for that, I am deeply ashamed. Franklin's voice dropped lower now, heavy with the weight of what he knew would be the most damning truth of all. "There's one more piece you need to understand," he said, his hand hovering over the final section of documents in the folder. Malik and Micah Carter weren't expelled because of a simple misunderstanding, or a disciplinary gray area, or even internal bias alone, though that was certainly part of it. They were expelled because they were too good. A few board members shifted in their seats uncomfortably, but no one interrupted. Franklin pressed on. "When those boys began outperforming even our highest-ranking legacy students, questions started to form both inside and outside the school. Whispers among faculty, curiosity from a regional grant compliance officer who requested performance reports linked to the federal funding. But here was the problem: there were no actual programs in place. Nothing formal, no mentorship initiative, no academic bridge sessions, no tutoring system. Just a few scattered efforts, some borrowed from other budgets, some never launched at all." He tapped the page. Yet we were filing progress reports that claimed those services were up and running, and we used the twins by name as proof of the grant's impact. He paused, letting the board absorb that. Their success became a liability. The more they achieved, the more visible they became. And the more visible they became, the more likely someone from the outside, someone with auditing authority, might ask to visit the program, meet the students, verify the outcomes. But there was nothing to show. Nothing but two boys succeeding on their own, unsupported and unprotected. That's when the conversations changed. It wasn't about helping them anymore. It was about neutralizing risk. Franklin's face tightened, guilt rising in his throat. So they started looking for a way out. Something clean. Something final. That's when the handwriting concern was brought up. That's when Ellen was pressured to stay silent. That's when Malik and Micah were turned from shining students into convenient scapegoats. Their expulsion wasn't a disciplinary decision, it was a calculated cover-up. The fastest way to eliminate the threat of exposure was to eliminate the evidence of success. His words echoed through the room, met with stunned silence and lowered gazes. Westbrook didn't just fail these boys, it used them. And when their excellence threatened to reveal the institution's failure to honor its own promises, it erased them deliberately, cruelly, and with full knowledge of what it would cost. Malik stood, his voice steady, calm, but laced with purpose that commanded attention. Micah rose beside him, the two brothers now fully in control of a room that once discarded them like forgotten footnotes. Now that the truth is on record, Malik began, it's time to talk about what comes next, not just for us, but for this institution. He paused, letting the silence hang before continuing. This school once chose silence over justice, image over integrity. But if we're going to move forward, we must begin by changing what this place represents from its foundation to its name. He turned to face the board directly. That is why, effective with our full financial partnership, we are proposing a complete institutional overhaul. Westbrook Academy, as it has existed, will no longer continue. In its place, we will build something new, something transparent, inclusive, and just, we will rename it Taylor Academy. A ripple spread through the room, a mix of shock and realization. Taylor, Micah added, was our mother's maiden name, a woman who raised us on truth, who taught us that dignity is not something given by systems, but reclaimed through courage. She never walked these halls, but her spirit lives in the values we will now embed into every corner of this campus. Malik continued, Taylor Academy will become a national model for equity-driven education. We will design a new admissions policy that prioritizes not legacy, but merit and potential. We will rebuild the curriculum to include accurate history, critical thinking, and community engagement. We will train faculty to identify not just intelligence, but invisible barriers. And most importantly, we will ensure that no child is ever punished here for succeeding too well. The room was still, but no longer resistant, just awakening. This isn't rebranding, Micah concluded. It's resurrection, not of Westbrook's name, but of its potential reborn through truth. As the final echoes of Malik and Micah's announcement faded into a stunned and reverent hush, all eyes slowly turned to Ellen Prescott. She remained seated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, heart pounding beneath her blouse as if unsure whether she truly belonged in this moment of rebirth. But then, Malik nodded toward her, not coldly, not with triumph, but with something closer to solemn invitation. There's one more thing, he said, his voice steady. In rebuilding this institution, we believe in honoring not only accountability, but the possibility of transformation. Ellen Prescott will remain at Taylor Academy not as a remnant of the past, but as a steward of the future. Ellen's breath caught in her throat, and she sat up straighter, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Micah stepped forward and continued. She will oversee the Carter Scholars Initiative, our flagship scholarship and mentorship program, dedicated to supporting high-potential students from underrepresented backgrounds. It's a full-circle responsibility, because redemption, when earned, becomes the foundation for trust. The weight of his words settled over her, heavy and undeniable, but not cruel. This was not a symbolic gesture of forgiveness, nor a quiet act of charity. It was a challenge, a calling. Ellen's mistakes were not forgotten, but neither was her decision to finally speak the truth, to offer the letter, to name the silence, to risk her reputation in pursuit of restoration. She knows what it means to fail, Malik added, and now she will help ensure this school does not fail others like it failed us. Ellen rose to her feet then, her voice trembling but resolute. I will not take this position lightly. I know what I cost you, and I know that this role isn't about atonement. It's about work, real work, daily, deliberate, often uncomfortable work. And I will give everything I have to make sure these students rise without fear, without shame, and without having to fight to be seen. In that moment, she was no longer the teacher who stayed silent. She was the architect of something braver, something just beginning. Alma Carter stood quietly at the edge of the room, her hands folded in front of her, eyes glistening as she watched her grandsons take their place not just at the table, but in the heart of a new legacy. She had remained silent throughout the entire meeting, letting the weight of truth, proof, and vision pass from voice to voice like a sacred torch. But now, as Malik and Micah sat beside one another, calm yet unwavering, the architects of a future built atop the ruins of their past, she stepped forward. Her voice was soft but steady, touched by the cadence of a woman who had carried stories in her bones for decades. I have waited 15 years for this moment, she said, the room falling respectfully still, not for revenge, not for apologies, but for this reckoning, this rebuilding. Her gaze settled on her grandsons, and in her eyes lived a depth of pride no title or board resolution could capture. They had every reason to come back here with rage, she continued. Every right to burn this place to the ground and call it justice. But they didn't. She took a breath, her throat tightening with emotion. They didn't return to destroy, they came to restore, to lift, to build something stronger, something fairer, something that sees every child and every truth. Her voice cracked, just slightly, but she did not pause. What you see here, what they've done, it isn't vengeance. It's vision. This isn't a story of punishment. It's a story of repair. Alma turned slowly to the board, to the teachers, to Ellen, who stood quietly with her head bowed. These boys, these men have taught us something we should have known all along. Justice isn't about settling a score. It's about setting things right. She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph Malik and Micah as children, arms around each other, eyes full of promise. Holding it up for all to see, she added, her voice steady now with clarity and grace. They were never the problem, but now they are the solution. And in that moment, the Carter legacy was no longer one of loss. It was one of righteous return. As the final documents were signed, and the room gradually emptied of board members and faculty, a heavy but hopeful quiet settled over what had once been a battleground of truth and denial. The walls, once lined with portraits of wealthy donors and forgotten headmasters, now seemed to breathe with a different energy, one forged not by prestige, but by reckoning. Outside the window, the school grounds looked the same manicured lawns, the same proud brick architecture. But inside, everything had changed. The very foundation of Westbrook had been cracked open and examined, its sins named, its silence shattered, and from that fracture, something new had begun to bloom. Malik and Micah stood near the entrance, surrounded by the echoes of their former selves. Young boys once let out those doors in shame, now returned as men who had redefined the meaning of triumph. Their presence was not about reclaiming pride. It was about offering a new blueprint, one built on truth, equity, and the belief that institutions can evolve when held accountable. Ellen remained nearby, her role no longer a secret penance but a visible promise to never look away again. Alma Carter waited just behind her grandsons, holding her old photograph, her eyes wet with quiet gratitude. The new plaque would be unveiled in a few weeks. The programs would roll out by fall. Students, real students who needed this place to live up to its potential, would soon walk these halls under a new name, guided by a new mission. And while the pain of the past could never be undone, it would no longer be hidden, no longer whispered about in corners. It would be taught, acknowledged, woven into the very story of the school as a warning and a vow. Because Malik and Micah didn't come back to erase history. They came to honor it with honesty and action. And as the final light of afternoon spilled across the table where the Carter Foundation papers lay, one truth remained etched in the air like a vow: justice doesn't erase the past. It rewrites the future. In real life, we may never return to the exact place where we were wronged with the power to rewrite its story. But the journey of Malik and Micah Carter reminds us that healing isn't always about revenge. It's about truth, restoration, and purpose. And many of us carry the weight of injustice, whether it came from a school, a workplace, a family, or a society that once refused to see us fully. The temptation to stay angry, to shut the door, or to walk away forever is real and often justified. But there is also another path, one that uses pain as fuel, not fire, one that transforms wounds into blueprints for change. The Carter twins could have used their success to distance themselves from Westbrook forever, but instead, they chose the harder path. They faced the people who hurt them. They demanded truth not only for themselves, but for those who would come after. And most remarkably, they didn't rebuild the school in their image. They rebuilt it in the image of justice. That's the power of leadership rooted in integrity. That's what it looks like when accountability becomes action. The lesson here is clear. Real change doesn't happen by forgetting the past. It happens when we face it unflinchingly, publicly, and with a vision for something better. And sometimes, the very people who were once silenced must become the architects of the new world. You don't have to be perfect to do this work. You just have to be willing to speak up, to take responsibility, to stay in the room even when it gets uncomfortable. Because justice isn't a destination. It's a commitment. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of a truth you've carried silently, don't let it end here. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Save this video if it resonated with your experience. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We're building a community of people who believe in truth, healing, and rewriting the future together.